He's a
Right.
great example to us of how to carry out detailed historical research and then go a step further by publishing it for posterity, something that I'm always encouraging the members to do here. There may be very few of us who don't have a connection to those who died in the Great War, as it came to be known. We have all spent long hours poring over military records or walking through Flanders fields and searching the names on the men and gate. I certainly have done. To take this all to the level Gerard has achieved by linking the small parish of Lorrha to the city of Perth in Australia, and by bringing about a high-level meeting of our two countries to celebrate the memory of Sergeant Martin O Meara, VC, is a notable feat, and I look forward to hearing about it in detail. So if I can welcome the man who emigrated from Tipperary to Cork and is still in one piece. Welcome, Gerard. You're very welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, John. Yes, I'm in exile here in Cork, originally from Tipperary, Lorrha, Tipperary, and of course Gerard Corcoran also has antecedents there, ancestors there. And if you'll forgive me then for name dropping, Gerard is just one of the many illustrious people who have connections with the small parish of Lorrha. Forgive me for name dropping in the course of the interview, but this is some of the surprises that came up during my research for the book, Lorrha People in the Great War. And just to start off here, Lorrha is it's officially the Lorrha parish of Lorrha and Durra. Durra would be the cabinet of the parish, and then Lorrha, the other end of the parish, close to Portumna, County Galway, and to Burr, County Offaly, squeezed up there in the northernmost part of Munster and Tipperary. Here. Then this is a more detailed one. We're right on the banks of the Shannon. There's a few place names there. Starting from the right-hand side, you have Burr, just across the border, then bordering the Bosna River. Then you have Walsh Park. Then you have the village of Rathcavan, the second village in the parish, Anna Coolruss, which is the Callows there on the banks of the Shannon, Redwood Bog, Curraha, where I'm from myself, Lorrha Village, Ballymckeegan, which is on the banks of the Shannon. And again, a lot of the names down there would have Galway origins, like Corcoran, Donoghue, and Madden. And then Portland, also on the banks of the Shannon, and Portumna. That gives you a feel for where the parish of Lorrha is. Probably best known in ancient historic times, Saint Ruan of Lorrha, who featured in the Curse of Tara, which brought Tara to an end. King Diarmid there, they had a row there because a person named Gura sought refuge in Lorrha, and he was discovered there, taken out even though he had sought asylum in Lorrha, and he was executed by King Diarmid. And basically, Saint Ruan cursed Diarmid, and King Diarmid cursed Lorrha. So you had an ancient monastery there. He's one of the 12 patron saints of Ireland, and Saint Brendan of Burr there as well, and the adjoining parish, St. Columba of Terry-Glass. Then you had the Augustinian Abbey in Lorrha later on, about the 12th century. That was built by the O'Kennedys. They were the most prominent chieftains in North Tipperary. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
yeah, okay.
Yes.
So that's the remains of the Augustinian Abbey, built by the O'Kennedys. Sorry, I seem to have a problem with my gizmo. Yeah, their main castle was Lackeen Castle in Lorrha. It's an old tower house. They had something like 13 or 14 castles throughout North Tipperary, and the O'Kennedys were the most prominent chieftains in that area, in the region of North Tipperary, with their main castle there, right? And still in good condition, taken over recently by the Office of Public Works. Again, one of the reasons, Lorrha, I mentioned Burr and Portumna. At one time, about 1868, there was a railway built between Burr and Portumna. It really never got going because it stopped at the banks of the Shannon, so people had to get off and get across the Shannon and walk a mile into Portumna. However, when it went bankrupt in about 1878, nobody claimed ownership for it because it'd be liable for the debts. So over a very short period of time, everything disappeared. The sleepers, the ironworks, the telegraph tables, everything really disappeared. So it's called the Stolen Railway. There you see a part of it there, right? And again, when in sporting circles, Tony Redden from Mulla, County Galway, he came to Lorrha in 1947. He played with Lorrha in 1948. He played in 6 Munster finals against Cork, won 3 and unfortunately lost 3, went on to win the 3 All-Irelands, was goalie of the century, great family friend. And believe it or not, his county career with Tipperary started when he was 28 years of age. So most unusual when people in this day and age are retiring, right? And he was on the team of the century and the team of the millennium, and there you see the stamp they voted to him. Great friends with Christy Ring, they played against each other on numerous occasions, great rivals on the field and great friends in later life. Then I mentioned Lackeen Castle. In 1720, the Stowe Missal, which has spent centuries in Lorrha and possibly was written in Lorrha, was found when they were doing some work in Lackeen Castle. It spent a short time in Stowe Library and it's been called the Stowe Missal since. It really is a procedure for, it has some cures, also a procedure for the proper celebration of the Mass. It's in the Royal Irish Academy in Dublin now. It's one of the ancient manuscripts, a very small little book. It also has some medical cures as well, and I think it contains both Irish and Latin. It was found in this ancient reliquary, which is in the National Museum in Dublin. It's right beside the Ardagh chalice and the Derry na Flan chalice. It's one of the treasures of the museum. As you can see, it's highly ornamented. So there's a lot of old history there. Then later on, after the Cromwell, well, after the O'Kennedy settled, when you had the Norman conquest of Ireland, the Burghs built a Dominican Abbey in Lorrha, which is still in great condition. And that's what you see there is the main church of the abbey, but it was a huge building. And the other side, then there's an old mill, and it went in a circle around the current Catholic church. Like so, really, while quite a small place, Lorrha had 3 large monasteries there. And during the 12th century, 12th century, 13th century, you had Norman spoken in Lorrha. I mentioned Lackeen Castle. Then in 1603, the O'Sullivan Bear, they marched through on their way up to Leitrim. They came through Lorrha. They stopped at Lackeen Castle. They were fed by the O'Kennedys, continued on to Redwood there, and then the Clearys, which were sort of vassals and the Brehon Law people for the O'Kennedys, they attacked O'Sullivan Bear on the Shannon. The O'Sullivan Bears, they killed their horses, made most of the horse skins, and most of them managed to get across. And Mackegan was killed in that little battle there. That's Redwood Castle there, which is Mackegan's, and that has been recently restored. The walls are something like 6 or 8 feet thick. It's been lived there by Celeste, I think, Egan. It was bought by Egan. He was a state solicitor for Roscommon, and he refurbished the castle, rebuilt it, and it's a massive amount of energy to heat it and to keep it going. Anyway, what happened to my book was about 11 years ago, Seamus King, who's from Redwood, he'd be a brother of Liam King, the Tipperary hurler. He's a well-known author of GAA books, but 10 years ago, he completed his manual, A Lorrha Miscellany. It's mostly on sporting people from Lorrha, including Tony Redden, of course. It includes a chapter on O'Sullivan Bear, but he also wrote a chapter on Martin O'Meara Victoria Cross. Seamus asked me to help out at the launch of his book, and at the end of the thing, I said, look, I know that Martin O'Meara, obviously very prominent, but I know an awful lot of people from Lorrha served in the Great War, and I'm sure there's a book in it, meaning him to do it. And he said to me, well, why don't you do it yourself? Now, Seamus is a teacher, and I'm sure you've heard the expression, those who can't teach. So Seamus has actually written quite a number of books, and he put it to me. I took up the challenge. I didn't realize just how big a challenge it was, but I went ahead and over the next 4 years, I did a lot of research on my book, Lorrha People in the Great War, and Seamus kindly helped out with the launch of my book as well. And this is Private O'Meara of Lissernan that John spoke about earlier. Martin O'Meara died in 1935. He had spent most of his life, he returned to Australia in late 1918. He spent 2 months there, or 2 weeks, I should say. He was being assessed for medical examination, and he also had to go into quarantine because of the prevailing Spanish flu. He went straight from there into a psychiatric institution, and he spent the remainder of his life in that, dying in 1935. Very distressed. There's a rumor that, he spent most of his time there under restraint, effectively in chains. Very sad story. Came to Lorrha a few times during the war. Second time around, he didn't get such a great reception, and we always felt we should make it up to him. He never forgot his native place, and in his will, he left his legacy, a legacy there for the re-roofing of the Dominican Abbey in Lorrha. However, even a generous legacy like him, which in current days is about €100,000, wouldn't go anywhere near the cost of re-roofing the abbey. So instead, the funds were utilised by the parish priest at the time, who at that time held all the power, and it was utilised for building a small school up in Redwood, there where I mentioned earlier, where Gerard will be from, Ballymakeegan. This is at the launch of a Lorrha miscellany. On the left, you have Fiona Flower, grandniece of Martin O'Meara, my wife Kay, myself, and Noel O'Meara, another grandniece and sister of Fiona Flower, at the launch of the Lorrha miscellany. So Martin O'Meara, he never married, but he has quite a number of grandnieces and nephews. However, we did make it up to him there just a few weeks ago when his Victoria Cross, which was on loan to the National Museum of Ireland, it was loaned by he's normally held in the National Army Museum of Western Australia in Fremantle, which is just down from Perth. And on a special act of Parliament, such a treasure was on loan to the National Museum of Ireland, and we held and for the last day in Ireland, they agreed that they would bring it down to Lorrha. So we had the homecoming of Martin O'Meara in Lorrha, and this is a photograph is taken at the Great War Memorial in the centre of the village. And here on the left, you have the current Australian ambassador to Ireland, His Excellency Harry Gray, the Lord Mayor of Lorrha, Joe Dolan. And here you have Philip Fahey. He's a grandnephew of John Fahey. John Fahey was served with the he was a chaplain in Gallipoli. He's awarded the Distinguished Service Order. He subsequently went to Australia, and he officiated at the funeral of Martin O'Meara in 1935 in Karrakatta. He still has a family in Clonalty. In fact, Philip Fahey is living in the original home. And then you have various regimental representatives as well. So that was a big day out. So we had a commemoration ceremony at the Great War Memorial, followed by an ecumenical service in the grounds of the Dominican Abbey, which you see on the right-hand side. And that's my book, Lorrha People in the Great War. On the front cover there, you see Patrick Sullivan from the Bower. He was captured in March 1918, spent the remainder, he was a prisoner of war then in a place called Galicia in, Wrocław in Poland, which is now Germany, but is now in Poland. And he died of internal catarrh just about 5 weeks before the end of the war. And that's actually a disease I hadn't heard of, so I had to look it up, and it's actually internal eczema. So he died in just 5 weeks before the end of the war, captured in March 1918. So he had a very, very difficult passing. The blue and white there in the colours there are the Lorrha GA colours. On the left-hand side then, you have two members of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers. They sent a postcard back to their captain or their lieutenant, who was on leave due to wounds in action in Lorrha. And if you enlarge the photograph, you can actually smell the liquor off them. Both of them seem to have survived the war. One is a sergeant, the other is a corporal. Right? Now, moving on then to the contents of the book, I was quite surprised because Lorrha had a reputation as a Republican parish, mainly because of the Cronin family. Felix Hickson Cronin on the left-hand side came to Lorrha from Kilgarvan about 1895. He went back the following year back to Kilgarvan and came back with Kate Daly, his wife. They went on to have 8 sons and 2 daughters. So here you have on the left-hand side, that's Felix Hickson Cronin, and that's his son Philip Cronin and Tom Cronin, and he has 3 sons there. And that photograph was taken in 1911. So 3 of his 8 sons are in that photograph. The 8 sons were very active in the Republican movement. And when people think of Lorrha and the Republicans, they think of the period of that time, they think of Lorrha as being a Republican parish, principally because of the actions of that close-knit family. One of the sons of Felix Hickson Cronin, the Hickson came because one of his ancestors, there was a long tradition of teaching in the Cronin family, and Felix Hickson, one of his father or grandfather, he was a tutor to a Hickson family down in Kilgarvan, and he went on to elope with his student whose surname was Hickson. So that's where the Hickson part comes from. Felix Cronin is on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, then you have his nephew, also Felix Cronin. This features a lot in the Cronin family. On the left-hand side, you have Liam Spooner and Jodie Spooner, and that's taken in Cistercian College, Roscrea. Felix Cronin himself played hurling for Dublin. His brother Cronin played hurling for Clare, and Michael Cronin, who took over as teacher in Lorrha and taught me, played hurling for Tipperary. So of the 8 Cronins, you had 3 intercounty players, and Felix himself is a super player as well, Felix on the right-hand side. Great friend of Michael Collins. He married in 1925. This is taken up in Dublin, I think, near Stephen's Green. And the blushing bride that you see there is actually Kitty Kiernan, Michael Collins' girlfriend. So that's another reason why Lorrha features so prominently in Republican circles. They went on to have two sons, Felix Cronin and Michael Collins Cronin. So you can imagine where Michael Collins Cronin got his name. And Michael Collins Cronin only died 2 years ago. And again, he gave me, I have a chapter on the Cronin family in my book, and Michael Collins Cronin gave me huge support and access to the Cronin family album in writing the book. Felix Cronin is buried in Glasnevin along with the family grave there with Kitty Kiernan Cronin. And they're only about, as you know well, probably he's only about 100 yards from her ex-boyfriend or ex-fiance, Michael Collins. Then moving on then to other people in the Great War. This is a photograph of Eileen Kenny. She's 105 years old, and this photograph was taken in 2001. And her brother, Lieutenant Cecil Kenny Cairn, died in March 1918. And believe it or not, he was her younger brother. They were from Roscrea, but she came to Lorrha and spent her life living in Lorrha. And when she died, the family found a box under her bed which contained all the contents of mementos belonging to her late brother. Unfortunately, she possibly overdid the celebrations because she died maybe about 5 weeks after this photograph was taken. A lovely lady. This is a photograph of Cecil Kenny himself. He's buried in Ham Cemetery. He was killed. I mentioned there about Patrick Sullivan being captured in the Great German Offensive Operation Michael in March 1918. Cecil Kenny was a machine gunner with the Royal Irish Regiment, and he was killed in that same Great German Offensive near Peronne. Initially, he had joined the Royal Irish Regiment, and I think it's because at that time he was working in Cove in Cork, or Queenstown as it was then, and their barracks is down in Clonmel. And normally a person from Roscrea would have joined the Leinster Regiment in Borr, which is where a lot of the Lorrha people went to. But I think it was because of his girlfriend. In her box under the bed, there was a book of poems, and it was by Ella Wheeler Wilcox, and the poem was "You Will Forget Me," and it was given to Cecil Kenny by his fiance, and it's inscribed "To Nigi or Niji from Molly," and it's underlined, "I shall pass from your life, I shall pass out forever, and these hours we have spent will be sunk in the past." And during my research talking to the Kenny family, talking to Eileen Kenny's sister-in-law, who was the family historian, she was talking to me, she said, "I wonder whatever happened to his fiance." And I said, "Oh, was he engaged?" He said he was. He said, "Molly Bianconi." And I said, "Molly Bianconi? You mean, is it Molly Bianconi?" And she said, "Oh yeah, maybe that's the way you pronounce it." So I said, "Really?" And I said, "Gosh, that's interesting now, because not only have I got a chapter on the Cronin family and the Kitty Kiernan connection, but I have Martin O'Meara VC as well, which Seamus King kindly allowed me to use. But now I have a connection with Molly Bianconi. And in fact, her full name title was Molly O'Connell Bianconi. She was a great-granddaughter of Charles Bianconi, which was effectively the Michael O'Leary of his day. He had something like 2,000 miles of stagecoach route throughout Ireland in his heyday. He was an Italian immigrant. When he came to Ireland in 1798, which was the year of the Wexford Rebellion, and the rumor is that he left Italy because of a romantic engagement. He had a relationship with a lady who was seen as quite an aristocrat, way outside his league. So the family arranged for him to come to Ireland. When he came to Ireland, he got involved in selling religious leaflets around the place. For a penny a go, he traveled all over Ireland. And according to himself, he had only 2 words of English, and they were bye bye. And to me, as an accountant and being quite pedantic, that sounds just like one word repeated twice. But he went on then to develop the stagecoach routes from Clonmel, which is where he lived at the time. Then he moved to Longville House in Boherlahan, which is quite unusual because Boherlahan means wide road. He was mayor of Clonmel on 3 occasions, and that possibly explains why Cecil Kenny there. And it's quite unusual because if you read about Molly O'Connell Bianconi, she later married a Captain Watson, but there's no mention of Cecil Kenny, and it's because the Kennys would have been a prominent Church of Ireland family at the time, and obviously Bianconis, they were a very committed Catholic family. So the thing was kept under wraps. But lucky enough, the family had a photograph of them together, which explains why I was able to say that they were engaged, but there's no actual record of them being engaged. Molly herself had quite a checkered career. She served in the ambulance corps, as VAD during the First World War, and during the time of her fiance being killed near Peronne and buried in Ham, she was up at Saint Omer up in France. She was rescuing the wounded, and she was awarded the military medal for her bravery. She returned to London after the war, and when I saw that photograph, I mean, I just said to myself, my goodness, and I said to Eileen Kenny, the daughter-in-law, I said, my God, she's magnificent looking. Discovered afterwards in my research that she was one of the first ever models. Before that, we're well used to models and supermodels now, but before the First World War, clothes were displayed on mannequins, if you like, statues of models. And it was only that he actually used live models after the war, and that came into vogue. And she was actually one of the first models there, right? Quite an achievement. She was quite a go-getter as well. She married Major Watson, and marriage didn't work out. She separated, and it was one of those things where at that stage the man did a decent thing, and he went into a hotel with a woman and was seen doing so by a private detective hired by a lawyer. And now the woman could have been his sister or his mother or whoever, but that was enough for grounds for a divorce. And the divorce, and she came back to Clonmel, went into the old family home in Longville in Boherlahan, and she opened a hotel. That's her in later life, and I got that from the historical people in Boherlahan. And on the right-hand side there is Rosie Cullen. She'd only started work there 2 weeks ago, and it was her daughter gave me the photograph. And in fact, Rosie Cullen looked after Molly in later life. She lived on her own in that house, and she had a fairly lonely existence. But anyway, Rosie looked after her in later life. They were neighbours, right? Then this is the nurses building in the Waterford CIT, Waterford Institute of Technology, the nurse education building. And when it was being built, it was given the name of a prominent doctor. And of course, that wouldn't do. Imagine most of the nurses are female, and the nurses' education building was called after a male. So they had to come up with somebody who was a prominent nurse. Now, Molly herself wasn't a nurse. She was a VAD and an ambulance driver, but they decided to call it the Molly O'Connell Bianconi Nurse Education Building. And that's at the opening of the building there. And that plaque there is both by Mary Harney. So she's commemorated there in Waterford. And you wonder the connection there. But the first stage route that they opened was Clonmel to Waterford. We're living in Clonmel. So that's that connection there. Moving on, going back in life then, I got a phone call there. One of the people that helped actually do my research was Conor Dodds. He was an amateur historian at the time, but now he's the historian in residence in Glasnevin Cemetery. And he knew I had got him to do some research for me. And he asked me, would I ever inquire about Ensign Charles Walsh, who saved the colours at the Battle of Albert in 1811. And that's a painting of him saving the colours there. The small battalion there of the Buffs, the 3rd Regiment. They're surrounded by French cavalry. They're defending the colours and the standards for all their worth. The first one was killed. He said he defended with his life. Ensign Walsh from Walsh Park in Rathcavan was wounded, and that then was taken over by Sergeant Matthew Latham. And you can see there, this is the Latham centrepiece. During the skirmish, his arm was cut off, where he defended it with his right hand there, and then he was slashed across the face. Amazingly, he survived, and he went on to have a very happy life. He married a French woman, and they lived in the Pas de Calais. There's a memorial to him there. Sadly, Charles Walsh died even though he came from a prominent landowning family, he died in poor circumstances, and he's buried in Lorrha. There's a lot of Walshes there. The family has gone out of the parish, but they're buried there in the Church of Ireland cemetery. And but anyway, while I was doing searching out the Walsh headstone for Conor Dodds, I came across this headstone as well in the Church of Ireland cemetery, and it's it is by the Byrne family of Portland, and in loving memory of John Byrne of Portland, who died 1892, aged 42 years, and his wife Mary, who died 1917, and their fourth son George Johnson Byrne, Corporal New Zealand Infantry, who fell very gallantly in action near Cambrai, 1918, aged 32 years. Now, as Gerard well knows, all the families in O'Meara in Lorrha are O'Mearas, Kennedys, and Mahers. And we have a few interveners then, like the McCorkerans, Donohues, whatever. But by and large, Byrne, and I worked in Wicklow for a while, is very much a Wicklow name, and I knew of no Byrnes in Lorrha. So I asked Conor back to him, and I had checked it out on the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and yes, he had been killed in action in Cambrai. He's buried out in the Somme, And so that was true. So he did research on it, and he came up then with photographs, and that's his father, Sergeant John Byrne, and that's he served in, I think, Peran. I think that's in Malaysia, but he died in 1892. Subsequently, I was able to get a photograph of the Byrne family, and this must have been taken in 1892 because it's all the family. They're in mourning clothes. So you have Robert, Mary Elizabeth, otherwise known as Bessie, the mother Mary, who subsequently died, is buried in Lorrha. Richard, George Johnson Byrne, who's commemorating the family, had son John Thomas and Edward at their father's funeral. And we think it's taken by the Stoney family who lived in Portland. Mary ran the post office there in Portland as well. Lots of post offices in the parish, and the Brown and Stoney family had cameras there. They're artistic. So we think that was, I'm fairly sure that was taken on the day of their dad's funeral in 1892. That's a treasured photograph to have. Again, this is Corporal George Johnson Byrne, who died in action there, and that's from the Auckland Star, 14th of October 1918. And funny enough, he was killed 5 weeks before the end of the war, and the number of people from Lorrha who killed 5 weeks before the end of the war is unbelievable. 2 of whom drowned in the Leinster, the sinking of the mailboat, the Leinster. So very sad, but it just shows you how many Lorrha people died and how many Irish and Tipperary people died right out through the war. He's buried in 15 Ravine, British Cemetery, Villar's Clew on the Somme, age 32. That's his headstone there. I took that myself, right? And that's New Zealand. He had emigrated to New Zealand. And as it happened, two of his younger brothers also served there with the New Zealand Regiment. This is Corporal John Thomas Byrne. And again, a photograph of him. He was wounded in action. And that's from the Auckland News in 1915. And however, later on, he was wounded in September 1915. Obviously came to Ireland to convalesce. And during that time, he married Florence Victoria Hill, and they got married in Burr. So he went on to have a family there back in New Zealand. He survived the war. This is George Johnson Byrne himself, earlier before when he joined up. He was a widower. He had 3 sons. This is Georgie on the table, Robbie and Teddy. His wife had died in just about 4 years after they married. They had 3 sons, and he went on to join the army. He was killed in 1918, and that left his 3 sons as orphans. And they had a difficult upbringing, to say the least. As you can imagine, the father being the breadwinner of the family, and the brothers had their own problems, right? And this is the sister, Bessie I mentioned earlier on. Now, it was interesting how I came in contact with her, because I had done research on a fellow called Robert Shepherd, an Irish Guardsman who was killed in the war. And the family knew nothing about him, but one of the members of the family, Lorrha O Meara, she'd be daughter of Eugene Mulligan, the Tipperary footballer. She did subsequent research for me, came up with a photograph of Robert Shepherd, and I put a chapter on him in my book. Lorrha was the historian for the Leash services, and a lady from New Zealand rang her, and I don't know how she made a contact with her, and asked her, did she know anything about the Byrne family from Lorrha, and did anybody know anything about them? And Lorrha, knowing about my background and my research, put her in contact with me. And I said, look, I have lots of details on their military experience and photographs, but I want something on the family background. And I gave her my military information. She gave me the background and the family photographs, which included that lovely photograph of George Johnson Byrne and his 3 young sons. And then when I had it all done, I put it all together, she said, why haven't you spoken about their sister? And I said, what about her? Well, she said, she was married to Frank de Groot. Look it up on Wikipedia. So I looked it up on Wikipedia, and I said, goodness me, I need to do some more chapter on him. Frank de Groot was from Dublin. He came from a Dutch Huguenot background. Bessie was from Lorrha. She went to work in Dublin. She was Switzer's, and she was quite a society hostess, right? Very popular, member of Fitzwilliam Tennis Club, and gay soul. And the funny thing about it is that despite the name, she was staunch Church of Ireland, whereas Frank de Groot, despite his background and his name, was a staunch Catholic. So again, it was a wedding or a relationship that the family didn't approve of. They got engaged in 1914. He went out to Australia to make his fortune out there, came back to Ireland, joined up with the 15th Hussars. He had a distinguished career in the military. And then in 1918, he came back, married Bessie, and they served in Germany for a while, and then went out to Australia. his background, his father was a sculptor in Lower Liffey Street in Dublin. His mother was from Tipperary, Clonmel, I think, or Cashel, and they had a background in the antiques business. So he was very good on furniture and antiques. And he set up a furniture restoration business in Australia, employed about 200 people. A lot of his, there were preservation orders on a lot of his work. He had, one of his clients was the House of Parliament in Australia. However, he was very interested in politics, and despite his Catholic Irish background, he was a staunch supporter of royalty, to the tune of that when Sydney Harbour Bridge was opened in 1932, he objected to having a member of the local Labour government opening it. He felt it was such a prominent piece of work that it should be opened by a member of the British royalty. And he got an old horse belonging to the daughter of one of his friends, an old nag, put on his old cavalry uniform, joined up with the Guard of Honour when they were parading through Sydney on their way to the bridge. Nobody noticed him, and just as they're about to open the bridge, he intervened and he said, "In the name of the decent and respectable people of New South Wales, I declare this bridge open." And there's the book on him, Frank de Groot, Irish fascist, Australian legend. Sorry, Shane, I want to put on a bit of a film there now. Is that okay?
Yeah, I've stopped that share, you start your video and share that.
Okay, come on with that. So, okay, come on with that. Oh yeah, sorry. I need to go into share again. Sorry.
Yeah, start the video and share that.
I lost it there. Which symbol do I go to at that?
Everybody's on mute
Okay.
except me.
Can you see it there now? Oh, sugar.
No, not yet. Have you
Yeah,
done the
can you see
share?
it? Yeah, it's on share.
No, try the share option again. You're not actually sharing anything right now, so try hitting the share and picking the video.
But where do I see? Oh, here. Oh, sugar. I can't. I'm sorry. I've lost it there now. Where's the symbol?
If you have you started the video playing?
I have, but I can come out of that for a second. Yeah. Sorry. Where do I get the back
Once
to
you-
Zoom? Oh,
once-
yeah. Oh yeah.
once
Maybe. Yeah, I have it there. Sorry. Yeah.
You should have the share button at the bottom of your Zoom screen.
Sure.
You
I've lost the Zoom. I beg your pardon. Where's the symbol for Zoom? I can't see it there. On the bottom.
Once you hit the share button, it should show you all the open
I haven't
windows.
called up Zoom yet. I can't figure out which is Zoom at the bottom.
Oh, on your Zoom screen, when you go down to the bottom, you should see mute. You put your mouse down at the bottom of your Zoom screen.
Yeah.
You should see mute, video, security, all
No,
those
I'm
buttons.
on the Zoom screen. I came out of the Zoom screen by accident. Where do I forget it?
Oh, you're still. I can still see you. So you're still zooming.
Oh yeah. Share screen. I beg your pardon. Yeah, I have it there now. Yeah. Okay.
And
Sorry
one
about
of those
that.
things
Yeah,
that's
see
showing
there.
you should
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
There you go.
Oh no, that's
That's your PowerPoint. Well,
Yeah.
I'll kick you out of that, and you go
Yeah,
back to share and look for your video.
Okay.
Yeah.
I should have lined it up because I could probably find that on Pate.
Yeah. Everybody's still on mute.
That's okay. I want to keep them on mute.
You want to keep them on mute?
Yeah, until he's finished. Because otherwise we get
Back on mute then.
dogs complaining and telephones ringing. And
Sorry, I'll come out Zoom again. Where do I get the Zoom thing again? Sorry.
you should, the way you went in there to share
Oh
that.
yeah. Share screen, right?
Yeah. The way we were there a second ago, we were showing PowerPoint. If you do the same thing, and this time look for the video. Are you getting that share screen?
I am, but I can't find the video now. Apologies. Yeah.
It should show you a list of all the things that are running on your computer when you hit the share screen option. No?
Just like now, I have started again there now, right? Yeah, there we are. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, beg your pardon.
There we go. We're seeing something. That's it. Got it.
People of New South Wales on this great occasion. His Majesty's message is as follows. I have learned with great pleasure that the Sydney Harbour Bridge has now been completed, and I desire to congratulate my people of New South Wales and all who have been concerned in the planning and construction of the bridge on the successful conclusion of the enterprise.
A sensational incident occurred and cameras alone recorded it. It all happened in a flash. An officer alleged to be Captain de Groot and a new guardsman spurred his horse forward and slashed the ribbon, saying, "I declare this bridge open," forestalling the Premier. He was quickly pulled from his horse and locked up in the tower.
Whatever get out, Lion.
Okay, so
There you go. You can go back to your PowerPoint now.
yeah, okay.
That's looking good.
Yeah, okay. So that's Frank de Groot. Just for the record, he was arrested by the police. They held him in custody, but it was agreed that really all he had done was cut a ribbon. He hadn't stolen anything. He hadn't hurt anybody. He was allowed to make one phone call. He made it to Bessie. Bessie absolutely tore the backside off him and gave him read him the riot act. But anyway, they were reconciled and they never had any children, but they had a very good relationship. Bessie was the gregarious person. He was the organizer, very serious going, right? Okay, sorry. Yeah, then moving on then, this is the namesake of Gerard Corcoran, Sir Arthur John Corcoran. He was the Assistant Under Secretary of State for War right through the war, right? Just to give you some of the secretaries, he was Under Secretary, the Secretary of State for War, Asquith, Kitchener, Lloyd George, the Earl of Derby, Milner and Churchill, right? He went to South Africa in 1902. He was in 1917, he was Assistant Secretary. In 1924, he was appointed Assistant Secretary, right? These are his children. You have, that's himself, John, Edward, Judith, and Molly. And I know that there is some relationship in the DNA between Gerard and John Corcoran's grandnieces. So there's obviously not just an overlap, but going back along, there's some connection there, right? John Corcoran, he was knighted in 1923, which was quite an achievement. His wife, Edna Leah Smith, she's buried in Cloughjordan. That's because she was visiting her daughter Judith in Cloughjordan. As I said, John Corcoran was knighted, but Judith served in Bletchley Park during the war, and she got an OBE. Lived in Cloughjordan, and her mother was visiting her during the war. She died, and after the war, 1953, she died, and she's buried in Cloughjordan, whereas John, her husband, who was a native of Oakley Park in Offaly, is buried in the UK. Judith OBE, she died in 1953 as well, just after her mom, and that's her confirmation of the OBE. Now, I could never find out what actually she did, but she had signed a vow of secrecy, as did her father. So it was very difficult to find out why they were done, but she certainly was more than a receptionist, was a very clever lady. And then moving up in years, this is about 1998, again an Australian connection. This is Governor General John Dean visiting Australia just a year before he's appointed Governor General. He's visiting Lorrha. His actual people are buried in the Dominican Abbey. His family are buried in the Dominican Abbey in Lorrha. And he came to Lorrha just about a year before he was appointed Governor General. He's still alive. He gave me great help in writing the book because his father, Cornelius Aloysius Dean, served in the Great War. Quite a tragic story because his great-grandfather and his grandfather emigrated to Australia from Lorrha, along with his two great-granduncles and their families, their wives and children. There was about 350 people on the ship when it sailed from Liverpool, and in the course of the voyage, 34 people died, including the wives of his two granduncles and one of his two great-granduncles and one of his granduncles as well. So anyway, they made their life in Australia. They were from a place called Rockview in Rathcavan, and they still have a farm in the family there called Rockview in Australia. Then moving on, this is Gerard Corcoran on the right, his brother Dermot, and that's my father. And Gerard came to visit my dad in 2014. He knew I had been doing research on the book, and I'm not quite sure how the contact was made, but he came to ask my father about his own father and asked if he knew him. I think father's name was Gerard as well. Am I right? Yeah. So he was
Thomas. Yeah.
Thomas, I beg your pardon.
Some sense, yeah.
So anyway, he wanted to find out about his father Thomas. At that time, Dad was 97 years of age, and we weren't quite sure, but because Gerard's father was from Ballymakeegan, my father was from Ruhan, the Rathcavan end of the parish. He was living in Lorrha with my mum on the Lorrha side of the parish. He wouldn't have had much contact with Redwood and Ballymakeegan, but as it happened, he knew all about it. So when Gerard asked him, could he say anything about his father Thomas, my father said, well, I'd like to start at the beginning. I'd like to start with your grandfather. So he gave him as much as he knew about his grandfather and then moved on to his father, Gerard. All right. So that was interesting. And then when Dad actually died only about a year and a half ago at the age of 103, and he had his wits up to the very end. But anyway, on his 100th birthday, my son arranged for him to have his DNA assessed, which we did, and we sent it off to the DNA. I forget and there's his relatives are. The first one is a Kennedy, second cousin, and then the second one is a fellow called Gerard Corcoran. And we could never, we were not quite sure, but we think my father's mother was Hawk, and there's Hawks in the Gerard's side of the family as well. But it's quite a coincidence that his closest, if you like, relative that we know about is Gerard Corcoran, and that's a relationship we didn't know about. But in fairness, my mom is from the parish, my father's from the parish, three of my grandparents are from the parish, and numerous great-grandfathers and great-great-grandfathers are from Lorrha. So I suppose we're related to most people in Lorrha at this stage. Gerard's family, I mentioned about the O'Kennedys, and I mentioned about Lorrha on the Shannon. Well, in fact, featured in the Cromwellian settlement because, as you remember, to Heller to Connacht. And one of the ways they kept the Irish in Connacht was they put a lot of settlements and a lot of landlords along the banks of the Shannon, including the Butler Stonies were in my book, the trenches, and whatever. So when the O'Kennedys were evicted during the Cromwellian settlement, there's it seems as if the Corcorans had some connection as well. So the Corcorans moved from Lorrha to Galway. They subsequently came back to Ballymakeegan, but this is in the Lorrha end of the parish, and it's a field called Corcoran's Meadow. Gerard didn't try to call it Corcoran's Field, but it's known locally as Corcoran's Meadow, and it's in a townland called Cheshire Moor. Now, Cheshire goes for 6, and means Cheshire means 6 each, and seemingly Cheshire Moor means a field that can be ploughed by 6 horses in the course of the year. It's a huge field, so it's unlikely that it just belonged to the Corcorans. And I'm sure they probably had a loan from the O'Kennedys there, right? But it's still there, and that's the field, Cheshire Moor. That's Cheshire Moor Farm, which adjoins it, and there you see the name on it there, right? But that house belonged to a Stanley family originally. It's purchased there recently by another family. This is Cornelius Dean MC, the 58th Australian Imperial Force. That's another connection with Lorrha. He was awarded the MC again. He defended a place called Hebutern, which is just outside Villers-Bretonneux, where the great German advance of 1918 was stopped. And it was stopped by the Australians at Villers-Bretonneux. He was seriously wounded in that engagement. So just another connection. He was wounded there in about March 1918, and that finished his war, went back to Australia, married, and his son went on to be Governor General of Australia. His son this is Governor General William Dean himself. He represented Australia at the inauguration of Pope Francis. And that's a funny thing because I was in communication with Governor Dean when doing my research in the book. I had his autobiography, I had his war record, his military records. And I was also able to establish on Ancestry.com about everything that happened on the ship that brought the family to Australia. including, and I should answer that we're going by the most oppressed people ever. But of the 34 people who died, they all died for various reasons, measles, mumps, drowning, suicide. But there was a young 23-year-old girl from England, and the captain of the ship who was responsible for the records wrote down that she died of grief. And to me, that's the saddest thing in the book, that, we forget that there were poor people in England as well who suffered around that time, and that unfortunate young girl died of grief. Then, when I was talking to Governor General Dean, he sent me on that photograph of him meeting Pope Francis. So I decided, well, look, perhaps it would do good to include some religion in my book, and who better to put in than the Pope? And so, as a courtesy to William Dean, who took the trouble to send me on the photograph, I included it in my book. Now, while my book was in the course of completion, this is Ronan McCreevy from the Irish Times. He came down to give a talk in Cork, and I took the opportunity to promote my book with him. And I spoke about Martin O'Meara, VC, and Molly O'Connell's fiance, and Governor General William Dean, and all the connections with Lorrha. On the left-hand side, you have Eugene Power. He's in the he's a sergeant in the Irish Army. He was also a member of the Great War Society, as you can imagine from his moustache. I know him quite well from dealing with Lorrha. He never heard of Lorrha until he met me. He lives in Cork, and he happened to overhear my conversation with Ronan McCreevy when I was tugging all these people. When I said to Ronan McCreevy, he said, "My goodness me," he said, "such a small place with all those prominent people." And then Eugene interjected and he said, "If you listen to Jerry long enough, you'll think the Pope was from Lorrha." So there you are. That's how the Pope got into my book. I thought it was quite amusing. And just go on then about the Pope and being from Lorrha. And again, forgive me for name dropping. This is my own immediate paternal grandfather and granduncles. This is there were 5 brothers in the family. This is Patrick. He lived in the family farm in Ruhan, which is called after Townsend after St. Ruan. This is Will, who went to live in Burr, and that's his wife there, Margaret Donoghue. And this is Edward. He emigrated to Fergus Falls in Australia. He set up a business in Fergus Falls in Minnesota. It was financed and supported by Germans, and from what I gathered, it was Jews actually who supported him. His best friend was a German who served with the Americans during the First World War. Edward also served with the Americans, but he didn't serve overseas. His friend was killed, and he married his friend's widow and adopted their daughter, who was the apple of his eye, and came to visit Lorrha on several occasions. The other 2 brothers then, this is my grandfather James and my grandmother Bridget Hock. We mentioned Jared's connection there. And on the right-hand side, you see James's other brother John, who went to war, and he married Kathleen Canning from Portumna. That's their wedding photograph there, right? So there's 2 brothers under 2 wives. Then this is my grandfather James, and these are 5 of his 6 children. You have, clockwise from the back, you have Evelyn, Edward Vincent, you have Michael, that's my father, whom you saw earlier on, brother Seamus, and Maury. They subsequently had a little girl called Phyllis. They died, my grandfather died at 30 years of age, leaving a widow with 6 children, which is very, very difficult. So my father, funny enough, his father died when he was 6 years of age, and my father died when I was 68 years of age. Just the way the thing goes. He died from Bright's disease, disease of kidneys. His brother John then married Kathleen Canning. They had 2 children. I should say that my great-grandfather's name was Edward O'Meara. My uncle's name was Edward Vincent O'Meara. Then moving on, John O'Meara and Kathleen had 2 children. This is Lorna, who married J.J. Hogan of Portumna. And this is Vincent Edward O'Meara, and he married Gabrielle Oliver in the UK. Edward worked as a dentist in the UK, Vincent Edward. And that's what gave you the connection there, because Edward Vincent features a lot in my family, and Vincent Edward, right? He born in Burr, qualified as a dentist, went over to the UK, married young, died young. And this is him there. He was quite a handsome fella. He did some modeling there in Burr before he emigrated to England. He died young, leaving two young boys. His mother remarried. She married a fellow called Hugh Morgan. Have your name there. And their 2 sons assumed their stepfather's surname. On the right, you have Jeremy, and on the left, you have Pierce. Now, I'm sure Pierce needs no introduction. His actual name is Pierce O'Meara. His people all came from Lorrha. They were evicted from the Pike before they went to Rathcabbin. So he came from a very poor background, and that's him. So his grandfather and my grandfather are brothers. So then, looking at source information, my father, Michael O'Meara, was probably the first to call, because not only did he know people who served in returned from the Great War, he knew the parents of people who died. I was able to contact relatives of literally everybody in the parish who served in the Great War, and they were very helpful. The local libraries, Bor, Nina, Thurles and Cork, very helpful, lots of information there. I happened to go to the Trinity College Library, the old book section, and then the Glasnevin Cemetery historian, Conor Dodds, before he ever became Glasnevin, he was a huge help there getting Dublin. I engaged a professional researcher in the National Archives in Kew who came up with all sorts of information, including the whole background to Molly O'Connell, the Anthony's divorce from Major Watson. Funny enough, Facebook was very helpful as well. The Butler Stoney family, the family who took photographs of the Byrne family, they were, that's how I made contact with them, because you won't find many Butler Stoneys. Well, I contacted Butler Stoney through Facebook over in the UK, and he sent me on a huge number of family photographs. And then just following up leads. And it was fortuitous because the sons and daughters, nephews and nieces of veterans who were still alive, the internet made possible contact with the people, foreign descendants. And then, of course, it being 2010, people were much more open about their relatives' participation in the Great War. And I just remember the families there. These are all families who have left the parish: Butler, Butler Stoney, Byrne, Dwyer, Finney, Lennon, Hen, Headsworth. And then people, Charlie Ardell, he was out telling me about Orla O'Meara's uncle-in-law. Even though the family knew nothing about him, but he was able to tell me that he died rescuing the wounded. He was wounded in the same action in Festabear, which was where Lord Ross was wounded, and died 4 years later from his wounds. Kitty Bergen, whose brother-in-law served in the Irish Guards. Sean Cook, 3 uncles served in the war. One was killed. Jim Coughlin, Oliver Crowell. Oliver Crowell is a member of the, he died there recently. He was a member of the show band there many years. Just forget the name of it, but he's two uncles were musicians of the Great War. Another uncle died. Michael Collins Cronin, son of Kitty Kieran, Paddy Hamilton, Martin Horn, Eric Kenny, the Molly O'Connell's, Cecil Kenny's uncle, nephew, and my father, Michael O'Meara, who was a huge help to me. So there you are, folks, and thank you for your attention, and I'm available to answer questions.